This game was played in the last round of the BC Championship of 2008, and I was playing against previous year's champion, Brian McLaren. Neither of us had a very good tournament, so I thought by the last round we got really tired. Whoever of us would make a bigger and faster blunder is going to lose the game, so either one of us had a pretty good chance to win the game. So I was just going to go into the game and see what happens. I played e4. The opponent replied with knight f6, which is one of his common defenses, and I played the line which I usually play, the exchange variation of the Alekhine Defence. So one of the benefits of playing in a close tournament where you know all of your opponents in advance is that you have a bit of a chance to prepare for the games. And I had some kind of anticipation that my opponent just might play this line, and I had a quick look at some of the variations. So I had prepared to play knight f3, even though there are some other options too. Play knight f3. And I'm willing to retreat to d2 with the bishop after f4. And if black now does nothing, he will end up with a bunch of weaknesses along the e-file. So he has to act quickly while the white king is in the center. So he expands with e5. That in its turn creates more weaknesses, and potentially it will be harder for black to defend against the weaknesses on this diagonal. But at this point it's a bit too late to worry about weaknesses. And now I have the problem of developing the pieces and also dealing with the potential threat of e4. And I really have to pick a good square for the bishop on f1, and it's the primary goal for white right now is to develop the bishop just so that I can get my king out of the center. And if I put it to e2, it's just going to be a little bit shy there and not very active. So it seemed to make sense to play c5, so that assuming the knight retreats, then I can play bishop c4 with tempo and get some active development for my bishop. Here, the more principled way is probably to play e5 to e4 and trying to complicate things further. And generally play is very messy, and white has some chances to fight for the advantage, but the position is pretty unclear. My opponent rather quickly played a somewhat passive move, so he went knight 6 to d7, retreating with the knight, allowing me to soon play bishop c4. But for now I decided to block the pawn just so that he never gets a chance to play pawn to e4 in the near future. Black continues development, the bishop comes out, king retreats, castles, knight f6, and here white generally has a good blockade over the light squares. At the same time he has an outpost on d6, and his rooks have some potential to play on open files. So white has a pretty good position here, and I had a chance to capitalize on it by playing knight to d6. That would put the knight into a pretty aggressive spot, threatening knight to f6. Potentially another knight might join this attack, and just getting up on the black king who's stuck in the corner. Instead I played a bit passively, and I played here knight to g5. This allowed black to exchange one pair of knights, and then he even advanced the pawn further, creating some weaknesses in my light squares, which got pretty nervous at the time. Bishop g5, and even though black is about to attack to create some weaknesses around my king, he didn't mind exchanging queens, and after that I felt a little bit relieved. Because what happens is that if black's attack doesn't work out, then I may still preserve some pressure against the weaknesses. And I still maintain the chance to invade on d6 with the knight. Black was threatening to take on g2, so I stopped that with g3. And now the important moment of the game. What do I do with this knight? Do I leave it here, or do I allow him potentially to jump to e2 or to c2 or elsewhere? So it made sense to trade it off. And even though at that point black has 2 bishops, white has a very important trump. Very strong knight on d6, and at this point white has the advantage. Let's say after black allowed me to play c5 and bishop c4, white's probably generally better, and even though white missed the best chance, he still has a nice position. And here the problem is that the pawn on b7 is hanging, and black never really figured out a good way to solve the problem of that pawn. And part of the problem is that if he ever plays something like b6, then the pawn continues to march forward, and it's inconvenient for black to play something like rook d8, attacking the knight, because then knight f7 would win the rook, the exchange. But he also has a hard time dealing with that pawn advancing forward. So he decided to choose a different way of dealing with that threat. Well, to ignore it completely, but that didn't quite work out as well. He went a5. This is a strong move, rook e1, because the threat is to invade with the rook on to e7. That would be quite unpleasant. So black has to spend some more time defending against the threat, and now I simply took the pawn. So I still have a great knight, and the pawn is ready to advance. And black's bishops are somewhat restricted by his own pawns. Even though the pawns seem like they might be dangerous at the moment, they're not yet, and they never actually get a good chance in this game. So maybe black thought he could counterattack the pawn, and it could be a little bit hard to defend it because it's disconnected from the rest of the pawns. But it turns out that's not a very big problem, because white actually doesn't have to always defend the pawn, and it seems like the pawn at the moment is unprotected, but trying to win it back is causing further problems for black. So that's what happened. Rook c5, and then knight e4, a fork, hitting the rook and the bishop. If he tried to retreat with the rook and defend the bishop, this would still cost him the exchange. So maybe this is what black overlooked when he went for this whole a5 idea and the idea of giving up the b pawn. Black could probably struggle on here, and this was probably his best chance, because he would still maintain the d pawn that is defended by the bishop and is restricting the white rooks, preventing the rooks from invading. But this was, he would still be down the exchange in that line. Instead, he decided to give up the exchange slightly differently. He played bishop e7, but I simply took it, and now not only black is down the pawn, down the exchange, his bishops are also fairly discoordinated. This bishop is unprotected. This bishop is unprotected. They're both defending the pawns. They don't have time to retreat and keep the pawns defended. So he tried to keep the bishop on the outpost on c5, but now also the rook becomes vulnerable. And with the rook hanging, the bishop hanging, this bishop being unprotected, all the pawns being weak, and being down the exchange, my opponent decided he's had enough and he resigned. So this was an interesting game, and it was a good way for me to finish up that tournament.